Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. The following episode is myself talking to Henry Franzoni, who's been on the podcast multiple times. And it's a record of what happened to myself out in the Oakridge area during Sasquatch Summer Fest. There will be many episodes to come that will be interviews with people I met at the booth about their experiences. So stay tuned for that. This is just the first of many Oakridge-themed episodes. As always, thank you for listening. Let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we're going to spend some time chatting about what happened in Oregon, in Oakridge. And I've got a good friend, Henry Franzoni, along for the ride to be kind of a sounding board.
Hi there, everybody.
You may know Henry from previous episodes. I've talked to him a few times, and they've been extremely enjoyable. He's also an author of such books such as In the Spirit of Siatko, Indians, Geography, and Science in the 19th Century, which is an amazing book that goes over all of the kind of Sasquatch-related names in all of the states, which is very cool. It's a great reference. And also Failing in a Cooler Way, Why I Never Found Bigfoot, which if you like the first book and you want to get a lot deeper, that book gets extremely deep. So I'm a fan of both of those books that Henry has written, but it's a pleasure to have you here, Henry, and I'm excited just to kind of chat with you tonight about what happened.
Hey, I'm really happy to be here. Yeah, I will hear your stories and we'll see how I react, because I haven't heard your stories yet, so I don't know what happened to you in Oregon.
That's true.
I know you were down outside of Oakridge, Oregon, and that's one of my hot spots that I identified in my studies of Oregon. You know, there's hot spots all over. You were definitely on top of one of them.
Yeah, it's going to get interesting, Henry. So I haven't told you anything just because I think it'll be interesting to have it recorded. So to give you background of why I was out there to begin with, so about a year ago, I did an interview with an older gentleman named Ronnie Roseman, who's from Oakridge, and him and his friend Dwayne had a really interesting experience where they had been tent camping in this meadow in an area. They were up there tent camping, and pretty much Ronnie does a sound which I've heard in person, and it sounds like one of the more aggressive sounds from the Sierra Sounds. And about 10-15 minutes later, they had all these creatures came rushing up the side of a mountain, and he says that it sounded like an agitated chimpanzee, a mad owl, a coyote, a raven, just all this stuff. And pretty much they jump into the tent, and for an hour and a half, they are just bombarded by these animals rushing all around the tent, making crazy noises, almost rushing into the tent. And it's just a very intense time, right? So that's how this all kind of started. And then Ronnie's daughter started a festival, which this year was the first year, called Sasquatch Summer Fest in Oakridge. So she invited me out to that. She said, hey, if you can get out here, I've got a space for you in the speaker's Airbnb, and you can talk to people, and this is a great deal, right? So I had a booth out there. I thought I was just out there to talk to people from the town about their Bigfoot encounters for the podcast, which, you know, is pretty sweet, right? And so I totally did that, and I got some wild encounters. But what I didn't expect to happen, Henry, is that they actually took me out into the woods multiple times, just forest roads, for a long trip. And I'd never been on a Forest Service road in the Pacific Northwest before, and it was like miles and miles and miles outside of Oakridge. And they took me up to this area. And when you go up to this area, the day before, a film crew, actually, when I got there, the morning of the day I got there, the film crew, there's a documentary film crew, Jason Kenzie's crew, and they had been up there and they had a visual of a Bigfoot on the edge of the meadow, a smaller one jumping out of a tree. And they had some more visuals in another nearby area. So that's important to know that they go up there, and then I go up with them at night to kind of check it out, and nothing really happened. It was an interesting area, getting used to the Oregon woods, never been out in there. But the next day, Ronnie and Dwayne actually took me out for multiple hours to where they had their encounter, that meadow, and other places where they've had encounters too. So we are in this area, and Dwayne first says, okay, so there's this area where the big Sasquatch or the alpha Sasquatch will run out of the woods, and I want to take you in there and show you around. And I was like, okay, so let's check it out. So we go in there, and we're looking around, and he notices there's like a tree, which is about 1.5 feet off the ground, where it's been almost like gripped and twisted and broken. And then I looked around, and there were like 5 or 6 of them in a kind of a circle, which was weird, right? And so we notice stuff where like there's trees that are broken off 8 foot up, 12 foot up, and just weirdly placed trees as well. And so there's that, and we're like, okay, nothing happened in there. So then we walk over to the meadow area, and I walk through the meadow to where an individual had seen the Bigfoot jump down from a tree on the edge of the meadow, and I see there's a Bigfoot print over there. So it's about 15, 16 inches, and it had toes. And I checked that out. I'm like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. So remember that for later. And then Ronnie and Dwayne, they were like, hey, check out where so the day before, the film crew had put an apple, an orange, and a banana in a tree. And they're like, go check this out. So we were the first ones back. Let's check it out, see what's going on. So the apple was on the ground uneaten, and the orange was on the ground uneaten, and the banana was on the ground, and it had been peeled and eaten. And there was a 16-inch footprint right next to it, next to the tree. So like that was really weird, man.
Yeah, that should give you some clues right there.
That messed with my head for like 2 days, Henry. And I was like, man, there's like something out here that has hands and that can peel stuff and eat stuff, dude.
Yeah,
it's
like you got an actual like experiential fact there where you go, wow, like something peeled this banana.
It got really real for me, man. And so that happened, and then we were hanging out a little bit. And when Ronnie goes up there, he likes to play songs on his guitar and sing to them. That's how he has like a good experience with them in a relationship. So they seem to like music, I mean, really, they're people that like music. So he played a song which was kind of like 60s type song. You can imagine what the band name might be. I don't want to trigger any algorithms, but so he was playing his song, and like a minute into it, there was like this huge roar from the woods. And like, I felt like all the blood rushed from my head down to my feet. And after it did that, like I heard half the roar because it's like my ears stopped working. And I looked over at Dwayne, and his like face was all pale, and he was like freaking out. He's like, dude, it's happening again. And so we were like, oh man, what is roaring at us from the woods? And then we're like, okay, we got to go and help get the festival kind of set up. But then Ronnie was like, let me play one more song for him. So we're like, man, okay, whatever. So he starts playing a song, and then about a minute into the song, again, there's like another roar, but it transitions into a scream. And like, dude, that was just I've never experienced anything like that, man. And it was really weird, Henry.
You got a real taste of Bigfoot there, didn't you?
I did. I wasn't expecting to be put into a situation where it was very real and it was happening in front of me, and not just I'm talking to people about it on the phone and recording it, but like I absolutely experienced these things in real life. Now, it wasn't a visual, but like, yeah.
Yeah. Do you really need a visual at that point?
No, absolutely not. No, Henry, I am so far because of that. I'm so far, I mean, down the road, I guess, as you alluded to in previous interviews, because of that, I'm extremely far down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that a thing like that can really answer a lot of questions for you, and it gives rise to a lot more questions, But one of the things that is cool about the whole Bigfoot thing is that what just happened to you, which is, people don't know if it's real or not, it's a hoax, and they go through all the same old stuff. But if you go out there and you have an experience like what you had, boy, the question's answered. Something's out there. You're not sure exactly what it is or exactly, what's going on, but there's something there. Something roared at you and screamed, and it had tremendous power, I'm sure. Like, it gave you an impression of incredible power.
Absolutely. It was so far out in the woods on all these like switchback roads, and like, dude, there's no one else out there. And just to experience that, it was like, man, there's no question. And then there's other weird stuff, Henry. So it's like we went back out there on the Sunday after the festival, because there was an individual that wanted to look at the tracks that's pretty well known in the community. He came with us, and so we showed him the tracks on the edge of the meadow, and he actually ended up finding more tracks in there. After that individual left, it was just me, Dwayne, Denise, which is Dwayne's daughter, and a few other individuals. And Denise is around my age, but the thing you need to know about Denise is that whenever she's there in that area, like, activity seems to really pick up in a way that you hear this. It's like a half a bird call where it's like a single tone, and it'll start making the noise from the tree line, but then she responds to it. And so they were communicating back and forth, and it was the craziest thing I've ever seen, Henry. Like, it got to the point where, like, you could tell whatever was making the sound was getting more excited, and it was like she would make the noise, and then half a second later it was like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I just didn't know how to handle that either. And it was just like, it was right there inside the tree line. It was a weird thing, man. I don't know. That messed with me a lot too.
Could you see, well, the thing that kind of happens is that you can't really pinpoint where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it seems to be coming from a place you can see plainly, but you don't see anything there. But the sound is coming from that empty place.
Mm.
I don't know if that happened to you, but that's the kind of thing I've noticed with some of the sounds. But that's interesting. That's interesting. You had in my opinion, you had a genuine Bigfoot experience. You fall into the realm of people that did not see a Bigfoot, but what happened to you certainly convinced you of the reality of Bigfoot beyond any doubt. It sounds like those people have some affinity. It sounds like Denise shares some kind of connection with them, or friendship or something.
Yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff that happened too. There was at least one person that heard their name be called from the woods in that area one night?
Yeah, well, they know who you are. They're, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, they're people, and they're super scientists.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. Generally, if you generalize about the people, the Bigfoot people, you basically are talking about super scientists. And they're incredibly aware of what you are, what you think, who you are, and what's going on. And you don't have any idea that they have such an accurate picture of you. It's kind of like crows. I always compare it to crows. Because when humans look at crows, we can't tell them apart. They're all just the same old black crow. Hey, look, another black crow. We don't know. But when they look at us, they see individual faces, and they recognize all of us individually. And there's been a lot of research done at the University of Washington that's confirmed that crows identify individual humans. Not only that, they remember it for like 7 years. Not only that, they can communicate who individuals are to their offspring. So if a crow identifies you as a bad dude, he can teach his kids about you, the bad dude.
Oh, wow.
Or a good person that feeds them. They can actually teach their children the same thing. So crows have this whole thing going on about human beings. And they have us figured out, and they know who the good ones and bad ones are. So
that's
I
extremely
don't think
interesting.
it's a stretch to imagine that, an intelligent species would be the same way about us. And that's my opinion, is that they have a really good idea about each and every one of us individuals, which is why you're seeing behavior change depending on who the individuals are that are with you. And you all kind of intuitively sense that because they do respond to specific individuals in specific weird ways. I mean, not that you could predict it, but I think you had a real taste of that just now.
Well,
the experiences you're talking about.
Absolutely. And it was a thing where I'd heard people talk about this, where if you are open to things, then maybe you will get more activity than a person who is not open to anything like that and just maybe looking for certain things. And I experienced that 100%, where when certain individuals were there that were only into certain evidence-based things, stuff did not happen. But when they were not present, it was game on, Henry. And it was the weirdest thing I've ever experienced.
Well, they got their preferences, don't they? That's the way they want to do it. That's kind of how it is. They want to do it that way. They don't want to do it any other way. Yeah, they're. I would say that's really interesting that happened to you, because yes, that in itself led me to go solo that was one of the factors where for the last 22 years, I'd only go out in the woods with specific individuals at specific once in a while times. Like I just wasn't interested in going out in the woods with strangers. I'd only go out, with individuals that I knew that they were kind of fond of. I got picky about that. And I don't know, Oregon, it's cool. No, the thing is that that's really they are just people making a choice about who they like, and who they want to help out and who they don't want to help out, I mean, that's what I think.
There was a really weird physical thing that happened that I do want to bring up. The first night when I went out into the woods, when I got back, I noticed I had what seemed to be like 2 horsefly bites on my left leg and 1 on my right leg. And then I was there for a total of 6 to 7 days. As the week progressed, my legs pretty much got worse, and there was spread bruising it started to get, it just was not, it definitely was not horsefly. But for some reason I was like, well, maybe it'll just magically get better. Right. Until the day before I flew back to Iowa, I was out interviewing a wilderness guide at his cabin for the podcast. And I was like, hey, have you ever seen horsefly bites like this? And he was like, man, that looks pretty bad. It could be staph infection. You need to get to urgent care if you can right now. So I dropped everything and I went to urgent care in Springfield. And the doctors that I talked to there, they're like, well, it's not staph infection, but we have no idea what happened to your legs. This makes no sense at all. They pretty much threw every blood test they could at me, and I ended up being put on really heavy antibiotics. I had a fever by the time I got to the urgent care. Thankfully, it started going away about like an hour or two after I started taking the medication. But they're like, it's weird because it looks like someone took a big log and just beat your two legs. And I was like, it's weird because I don't even remember getting bit. And so that was really weird. There's some weird Native American legends in that area.
Yeah, I'm familiar with at least a couple of them.
Yeah.
But not that many. Yeah. Wow, that's pretty unusual. I don't know what to think about that, but wow. Indians might look at that as some kind of sign. You know, I mean, that might be a message from someone about what you're doing. It could be a, hey, slow down message, or stop, or, you know, I don't know. You know, I mean, Indians might look at it a little superstitiously-ish and say, hey, you know, maybe you should check what you're doing, because maybe you're getting crosswise with Mother Earth. Yeah. You wouldn't want to do that. No. And that's the thing, is that this whole Sasquatch thing involves Mother Earth. And you can, you're getting crosswise with Mother Earth if you're getting crosswise with the Sasquatch. In my opinion, that's kind of how I think it is. So I think they're husbands of Mother Earth, in essence, you know. But attitude is everything.
Yeah.
And what you alluded to before is really the reality, which is the attitude you have makes a lot of difference as to what happens. And me, I think that one should have an attitude of like tremendous respect, because I think people don't really respect what they're seeing enough in general. But I don't know if respect is the only key, but I know that if you, like you talked about openness, if you got an attitude, a good attitude, and you're like a genuinely good soul, and you've got a really good attitude, and you're thinking, you're, being objective, you're trying to make things better, if you're that kind of person, kind of optimistic person, I think that increases the likelihood that you can have an encounter. And I only say that based on experience. That's just not something that I can, point to an experiment and tell you, look,
right.
This is the truth. But I've had a lot of experience, and when I did, it seemed to be connected that way to the respectfulness and the openness of my attitude. My attitude seemed to have an awful lot to do with it. I think, you just sort of learned, you're just sort of saw a lesson in that things changed as you changed the composition of your group. And, not to say anything's wrong with anybody, but
right.
I think that, the big feet themselves have an opinion, and you just saw their opinion, in real life. People don't give them credit for being people and thinking about what is going on, but they do, in my opinion. They're like crows. They know us way better than we know them. We look at them, we go, look, we can't tell them apart. We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But we just go Bigfoot, But they look at us, and I think they go, Jeremiah Byron. Let's check his podcast. I think they know the whole picture, man. That might be a little crazy for most, but that's what
I don't think so, and you'll see why in a minute. I don't know how much of this is going to be left in the episode, but I'm just going to tell you everything. I have no idea.
Hey, get the editor out.
Yep. I'm just going to share
why we
everything,
need editors. Yeah, we need editors for times like this.
So I was leaving to go back to Iowa Tuesday. Monday, I'd gotten back to Oakridge from urgent care, and I was like, you know what? I'm not doing interviews. I'm just gonna drive around and just kind of chill out and have a good night, get something to eat, check out some areas I'd heard about, just kind of chill out and maybe just enjoy myself for a night, right? So I talked to an individual. His name is Bill Morris from Oregon. And he's a great guy. He had told me, he's like, Jeremiah, if you want to see them, just say in your mind that I'm not afraid, and I am ready for you to show yourself to me. It was a statement, something to that effect, right? So as I was driving around, I had been repeating that in my mind, and I was driving down by a reservoir that was south of the town. And as I finished saying that statement in my mind, I drove by a pine tree that was covered with vines, and so it was all green. And I saw for a split second what looked like to be like the outline silhouette of a Sasquatch that was about 8 to 9 feet tall, but then it disappeared completely into the tree. So I'm not sure what to think of that either. That's just a really unique thing. I'm not sure if, my logic side is fighting against my like Bigfoot side, where my logic side is like, well, that's probably your fever, right? But my Bigfoot side is like, there's something else going on here. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that guy gave you some good advice, I think, or at least I myself was very, very frightened and tried to tamp down my fear from the very first moment I had an encounter. And for years and decades, I kept talking to myself about, hey, calm down, don't be afraid of them, don't be afraid, Then one day, I got to a place where I wasn't. And, I'm in that place today where I'm not, I don't even think about them as them anymore. But, yeah, it's an interesting proposition, what happens there. So, yeah, you had some very strange things. Yes, indeed. Well, they're talking to you, sir. They've taken note that you are a person that's interested in them, and they're starting a long curriculum that you will probably stick around for, I would think, because I think that's what you're going to get now is they'll keep feeding you little tidbits of information, no matter where you are. You could be in Iowa, you can be anywhere, man. They're gonna be tweaking your attention. Once they get your attention like that, they can kind of like stick with it for a while. At least that's what happened to me. Once I really went down the rabbit hole like you,
right,
where I'm like, they're real, there's something real out here in the woods, boy, that actually triggered like a lifetime of weird stuff. So maybe the same is in store for you, sir.
Well, we're getting there. There's one more thing that I need to share with you that happened on Sunday afternoon. There was a time, so we would sit in nylon chairs across the service road and face the meadow. And there was one point when we were just sitting there watching the meadow to see if anything would happen. I think this was, I can't remember if it was before or after the mimic bird noises, but I remember I was staring into the tree line that's on the other side of the meadow, and it felt like I couldn't move, and I was staring into the trees, and I was just not able to move, or almost felt like I could breathe for like 5 minutes, and it felt like I was paralyzed. And then all of a sudden it just was like boom, then I could move around again. It was really, really weird.
They can do that.
Not
they can
sure.
do that sort of thing to you.
Yeah.
In my opinion, like science as we know it today may have a tough time explaining that, but they can do that. They can control the autonomic nervous system of other species, including you. They can actually control your body like a puppet and march you off a cliff if they don't like you. Now,
wow,
they tend not to do that to people like you, but freezing, let me just step aside for a second. So the thing about me is that, like many people today, I had a whole bunch of money, and I spent a whole bunch of money sending a team around to investigate 485 sighting reports in Oregon and Washington over a 5-year period. And I collected all the data of all these different weird stories. And then I sat around and, sifted through them and looked for, like everybody, commonalities and things like that. And what you're describing is one of those commonalities, the getting frozen and getting paralyzed. That happens all over Oregon and Washington, and it has for hundreds of years. And I've found even old Indian stories that tell the same thing. In the Indian story, they talk about how the power of Siatko was in the eyes. And when they look at you, they can actually just freeze you. And
wow.
I know from a lot of discussions with the elders of the local tribes that, they can control an animal, including you. They can actually run you like a puppet. And they can do it to every other animal. But what you were describing earlier, I think, is a different phenomenon, which is that they can imitate all the different animals, and they do a really good job imitating all the different animals, except the volume is off. They're too loud. So I've been out camping, and I heard a huge amount of crows come and land around me. It sounded like 100 crows, like an entire flock of crows landed right where I was sitting. But there was nothing there at all. There was nothing visible. And the crows, when they came in, were way too loud. And so even though I never saw a thing, I was like, well, this is a Bigfoot. That's what's going on here. This is Bigfoot for sure. So I make a leap of faith when stuff like what happened to you, I kind of immediately jump to, that's Bigfoot. When you talk about, oh man, we were in the tent and these things were all these different animals around the tent. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You had some real, genuine Bigfoot experiences, so there's something real out there now. You know it now.
Oh, absolutely.
You know it's real, whatever the heck it is. You know. It's a big step forward. I remember when it happened to me.
Yeah.
You get offline. That's what it's all about. It's like, well, I'm online, I'm talking about Bigfoot. But then you get offline and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, man, it's real.
That's what happened to me 100% in Oregon. I felt like coming back, I felt like I was a different person than when I went out there.
You were. You now know. you've been exposed now. Now you're like, oh man, this is. In a way, it can really get your attention now because you're like, holy beans, this thing is.
Right.
What is this?
When you were in Oakridge area over the years, did you ever go up into the woods around Oakridge and have things happen to you?
Yeah, everything changed for me at some point. I've had different breakthroughs with my whole Bigfoot thing, and the last breakthrough I left, let's just say it took me to a whole other place. But the thing that I like, what I did in that area was I had a connection, which was a woman who, you see, let's back up. The Holt family in Eugene built the Holt Center, this cultural arts center, and they're the big old logging family that has donated all kinds of public service buildings all throughout Eugene, and they're like the big local royalty. And I was friends with the granddaughter, and she would let me stay in her cabin on Odell Lake, which is just further up 58 in the Cascades from Oakridge. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you just keep going higher up to the crest of the Cascades. And so I would hang out in this cabin that actually was originally Alexander Graham Bell III's sports cabin, and it's right in this completely uninhabited corner of Odell Lake, which is a huge lake. And I'd be on the west end right by Oakridge in this cabin. And so I'd go up there with my wife and hang out, and I'd have experiences up there, but I kind of like, I'm one of those people that the experiences just follow me around. And wherever I go, so do they. It's like that.
I understand.
That's how it is now for me. It used to not be like that, right? I mean, there was a time where I didn't know that I, was one of those people that, just carried them around. Or whatever. I'm somehow deeply connected to the people before, yes, the ancestors, indeed, sir. So, yeah,
right.
I really love that area. But the other thing I have to say about that area is when you look at it from the perspective of place names, it's got all kinds of stuff like Windigo Butte and the Echo, and there's different spirit this and spirit that's, and there's all kinds of Bigfoot place names from the Indians, all up Highway 58 and all over the Cascades. When you go up to Diamond Lake and you go south, there's some fantastic lakes on the crest of the Cascades right by Oakridge. Diamond Lake and Odell Lake come to mind, and they're both heavy-duty Bigfoot spots, I mean, well, that whole area is. That's the thing is, after a lifetime, I mean, I'm kind of like, you get to a point where you have looked at so many Bigfoot sightings that you become convinced that they're random. And you go, wow, this is actually, they're random, because you can't actually tell if they're going to be in the city or in the country. I mean, granted, most of them are out in the places, the hot spots that we find, like Oakridge and stuff. There's always hot spots. But there's also so many weird sightings, like right on the edge of town or in town, or you get to a point where you're like, wow, actually, I have no idea at all where they are or where they'll appear next. You know, you set your stakes wider and wider to try to include all the outliers. And so I've definitely, done that. I started right at the little Oakridge area, right outside of Oakridge, and I focused on that. And then as I kept going around, Wampus Butte is right there. I mean, it's like a thesaurus for Indian place names for Bigfoot all through that entire area.
Oh, absolutely. There's one place that, so I had a booth there and I had maps of the area spread out, and people would come over and mark where they had experienced stuff or had sightings or heard whoops or howls. And it was very cool. I got about probably like 30 reports that had never been. These were loggers and construction workers and blue collar workers.
Right, people that wouldn't do it normally. Right,
they had never talked to the BFRO or anything, and this was all brand new stuff that I had captured. It was really, really amazing. One area that kept coming up, and this area has come up before I got to Oakridge too, is people have been chased out of a place called Spirit Lake multiple times. Had weird encounters out there, but a few hunters told me about how they had been to this place called Spirit Lake, which is out by Waldo Wilderness. Mm-hmm. And they said that at dusk or when it gets dark, all the wood will float to the middle of the lake, and then it will form a circle and start rotating around in a circle. And at that point, I was like, man, I don't know what is going on out here, but this is something else and something special is happening out here. It just blew my mind.
Wow. Well, Spirit Lake, I mean, every place I know of that's named Spirit Mountain or Spirit Lake is, a heavy hot spot. It sounds to me like a vortex forms there. I don't know. That'll be my guess, because vortexes do form, and my experience, I've experienced the vortex issue, and, not that I have an explanation, but it sounds to me like that's what's going on there. And one thing I don't know, this is just a little bit of wisdom from my years of doing this out here in my area. Isolated lakes high in the Cascade Mountains or high on the Coast Range are like some of the best spots, and I always thought of them as doorways to wherever they come from. That was my personal feeling, is that if you go up to high mountain, small lake, it could be a doorway. And this is based on my very first experience, where the very first time I encountered Bigfoot, I went to a place called Skookum Lake in the Cascade Mountains at 5,000 feet of elevation. So I basically just stuck with my guns, for 30 years, because that's the very first place I looked. I found them the very first minute I looked. And I figure that pattern has held true for me, that I don't know exactly how to explain where they are yet. Right now, I could offer a theory. But yeah, I think there's a vortex that may form there that gathers the logs around the middle, and it may be some type of doorway between wherever they're coming from and this place we live here. Yeah.
This has been a really good conversation. I at this point, I want to talk about the stuff that happened after I got back to Iowa.
Sure, man. Yeah. I'm trying to listen rather than, go, insane.
Absolutely. I got home on the 23rd of July. When I was going to sleep on the 24th, so I was in bed, and before I was completely asleep, I remember having a dream like I was at the edge of the meadow, and it felt like I could see dark figures in and around the meadow. And it felt like I couldn't control my surroundings, but if I knew what I was doing, I would be able to control what was happening in that dream really well. And that was just, after that happened, I actually reached out to Tobe Johnson, and he was like, you need to immediately start keeping a journal of what happens to you. So
they talk to you through dreams.
Yeah.
You know, they do. And that's how they like to do it. And we're getting messages from them. Yeah, you know, Tobe's probably got a good idea there, I'd say, you know, because, I mean, I know that's one of the ways they like to do it. They like to do what they like to do, and they like to, you know, reach out to certain people, and they like to fill them in from the inside out, you know, so it becomes an inside game where you are starting to learn what they're showing you. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, I think you're like a student in the curriculum now. Like they've taken you under their wing, and they're going to show you some stuff. And they just showed you a whole bunch, you know, like you got a serious introduction here. Welcome. It was like a welcome mat. They like Oregon. They like Washington. That's why there's so many sightings out here. They like these places. But yeah, that's why I can hear your story and go, man, you're on track, man. They're gonna pull the curtain back for you, buddy. The thing is, they pulled the curtain way back for me.
Right.
Way back.
Right.
Yes, they're getting serious now. They're really showing their true selves to people, and they're starting to show you their true self, and prepared to be completely blown away. You're not crazy. No, you're not in a place where you're going to get repeatable scientific data that you can share with your friends.
Right, exactly. But I'm not in for that anyways, you know.
You're not going to get that.
So.
Not anytime soon. You're going to get, they'll show you, you know, they approach us as individuals. They do not approach us on a larger, well, I guess they can. They certainly can. But, I mean, so far, most every encounter I know of is, you know, person to person. Like, that's where they show themselves to individual people. They don't show themselves to the masses. They don't, you know, they never show themselves to Meldrum or Peter Byrne or any of those guys. Like, those guys, they go out of their way to not give those guys anything, you know, like poor Peter, like, looked for 50 years and he found tracks once, you know, so.
That's wild.
But everybody around him, like me, I mean, I was on his project with him, and I'd have encounters, and Peter just like nothing, you know.
Did he ever get mad at you because you were having encounters and like he didn't get anything, or? He
took back then, I mean, this may sound familiar to you. I would try to describe what really happened, which was like a force field took out my starter motor.
Right.
And smell was really intense, and then it went away, and so did the force field. And Peter would pull me aside and go, "You can't tell anybody that story. That embarrasses us all.
Oh, no way.
We're not going to get it funding. We won't get any funding if you tell these weird stories about Bigfoot."
It's just all repeating over again.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, and so it was really seen as, oh, yeah, okay, Henry, fine, but don't tell anybody anything. Like, never tell that story in public, Henry. Never do that. No. Because that'll just ruin our credibility.
Yep.
And I was like, wow, you suck. But, of course, I had to keep that to myself, you know, because it's 30 years ago, and 30 years ago is a different world. And although that tendency has lasted into the present age with some people, but it's it was silly then. It's silly now. Peter was a weird guy because on private conversations sometimes, he seemed to realize and accept that it was weirder than a gorilla, that it was just really much weirder because they did convince him, they did flip him out over his lifetime a little bit, enough so that he knew something was out there and he didn't know what it was.
Right.
And it seemed to be too smart to let him get a proof or a view or anything. But he had, here's Peter Byrne. He's camping up in a wilderness on Mount Hood. It's the middle of the night, and a spotlight starts to circle around the clearing where he is in the air. It's not making a sound, but he declares it's a helicopter. It's a helicopter, he says.
Wow.
The people also there, it didn't make any noise. And it circles the dying campfire for 20 minutes. It's going around and around the entire clearing. And it is so, hands down, a total UFO thing that it's ridiculous. It's like, okay, that's a UFO. Really. Like, what can have a spotlight and not make noise and travel around a remote wilderness clearing on Mount Hood? Peter Byrne, his brain just couldn't handle that, and so he just decided that was a helicopter, period. That's that. It was a helicopter. Had nothing to do with Bigfoot or anything else. It was a helicopter. And I'm like, I'm there. And I'm going, Peter, that was a UFO.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, man, that's a UFO, and it's circling this lake high in the Cascades, a isolated lake high in the Cascades. Geez, and a clearing.
Wow.
Geez, Peter. I'm like, don't you know what's going on, Peter? No. So even when a Bigfoot event would happen right in front of his eyes, he'd explain it away like it was, helicopter, whatever, and just like, that's that. And he'd stick to his guns, too, like that was it. He'd make a snap decision, and that was that. And I was like, man, Peter, that it's weirder than what you're telling us, but he was really concerned with funding, and he wanted to present an image that got funded.
Man. Oh, wow. That's very enlightening, because it's just like history just repeats itself over and over with this subject.
Yeah, isn't it?
Just different players.
It is like that.
It's really weird, but Henry, thank you for, I just appreciate you talking tonight and walking me through some stuff.
Pleasure.
And
yeah, it sounds like you're getting into some territory where I can help.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I appreciate it.
I know.
Man.
You're sure. No problem, man. I'm happy to help. Really. Totally cool, man.
Thank you. I wish you the best, and I hope to talk to you again sometime in the future, Henry.
Yes.
Thank you.
My pleasure, Jeremiah. My pleasure. Thank you. Take care, man.
You too, man. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Okay. See you later. Bye-bye.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list. If you've had any encounters in Oregon, which I'm sure there's probably a few of you out there, please feel free to reach out immediately. you can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.
Her and I can get on here and we can tell our stories. Maybe there's somebody else out there listening that's too afraid to tell their story. Maybe this will give them the courage to come out and not feel so bad about it. Who cares what anybody thinks? I know what I saw. I know what's out there. That's all I care about.
Please let people know. Please let them know. If you ever see one of these things, you need to tell. Because if you don't, then shame on you. You know? Shame on you.